welcome to my channel, JMR Art. This will be episode number 9, first one with the mic, so let's see how it goes. Over on my Instagram page, I made a post to gather questions for a Q&A video here on YouTube. So in this video, I will be painting 3 portraits in gouache while answering these questions. So let's get right into it. For the first question, Amy Mary asks, have you always painted in gouache? The answer is no. I actually started with watercolor and eventually started painting with gouache as well. And now it's my current favorite. So for those who may not know, gouache is a water-based paint, very similar to watercolor, except it's more opaque. For the next question, P. Pingus asks, what are the pros and cons of using gouache? So one of the pros of using gouache compared to watercolor is the versatility. With gouache, you can paint light over dark or dark over light with no problem. Watercolor, you have to paint from light to dark and be careful to preserve the white of the paper for highlights. Watercolor is also a lot less forgiving, but with gouache, since it's easier to correct mistakes, I'm much more experimental and free with color. Gouache also dries a lot quicker than watercolor. One of the cons of using gouache is that it can always be reactivated easily with water. This means that you have to be very careful with finished gouache paintings because any water or moisture will disturb the painting. So storage in a safe, dry place is essential. However, that reactivation can also be a good thing. You can always rework and blend gouache even after it has dried, which makes it very convenient to work on a given piece at any time. For the next question, Annie Araldes asks, what's your favorite watercolor paper and why is that such a great choice? For watercolor, I prefer Arches or Fabriano cold pressed papers. In my opinion, watercolor works best on 100% cotton paper because the pigment flows a lot better and the paper is much more absorbent. For gouache, which is what I'm using now, I prefer Strathmore 10 mixed media paper, which is also what I'm using right now. I like working on mid-tone paper because it gives an interesting look. You can add lighter values to help the painting stand out from the paper. When working on white paper, the white of the paper tends to be the brightest value available. Kimber Rainbow wants to know if I'm using watercolor and acrylic. And quick answer, nope, it's just gouache. When it's watered down, it resembles watercolor, and when you use it more opaquely, it can somewhat resemble acrylic. IVD or Art wants to know what's my favorite brush brand and why. I would say Princeton brushes are my favorite. I've been using them for a while, pretty much since I started painting. And actually recently they asked me to be a brand ambassador, so that was pretty cool. Hadia Rahat Art asks, how do you make and edit your videos? I record my videos on my phone, which is a Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus, and I edit the footage in Adobe Premiere Pro. This is a quick bonus tip for you guys. One way to make freckles in a random pattern is to sort of splatter the paint like I'm doing now. So you just load one paintbrush with paint and then bang it against the handle of another brush, and you can get random splatters that can look like freckles. Victoria Amor wants to know, where do I find my references, and how do I pick the people that I choose to draw? In general, Pinterest is the main source that I go to for references. Lately, I've been also trying out the Sketchy app, and of course, just Google Images or Instagram. But Pinterest is probably my number one resource. And I just pick people that I think look cool or something that would be fun to draw or with interesting lighting. So the first portrait is now done, and I'm moving on to the next one. So now is a good time to talk about the reasons why I like starting with an underpainting. Quickly placing a single color down removes that initial fear of starting, because it's like I'm committed now, so there's no going back. It's like a switch goes off in my brain that lets me know that, hey, it's time to paint now. There's no time to be hesitant anymore. And as a result, with future layers, I'm much more bold and decisive with my brush strokes. It's also a good warm-up to get your hand used to controlling the brush, since you only have to focus on staying within the outline of the drawing while using a pretty big brush, which also helps with making decisive marks and brush strokes. So now time to answer one of the most commonly asked questions when it comes to the underpainting, and that is, how do I decide which color to use for the underpainting? As you can see so far in this video, I like to use greens or blues, and there's a specific reason for that. But just to start off by saying, this underpainting is actually pretty dilute, so it's quite easy to cover up. So you really have a choice in how much that underpainting influences the future layers, depending on how much you cover them or not. But with that being said, my choice of underpainting color usually boils down to a couple factors. First, I like choosing a color that's not directly observed in the reference. By choosing a color that's not directly observed in the reference, it makes it obvious whether or not you've covered that area with gouache or not. For me, when I was starting out with gouache, one of the most difficult things was learning how thick to mix the paint layers, how opaque to make them. And basically, before I would mix paint layers, and once they dried, they were too dilute and didn't really fully cover. But once I started adding an underpainting that was a different color, it made it pretty obvious that I needed to either add more paint to the mixture to cover it up, or less if I wanted the underlayer to show through. The reason why greens and blues tend to be my go-to colors for the underlayer, that has to do with the color wheel. So skin tones in general are within the yellows, oranges, and red range of colors. But those colors out of the paint tube can be quite saturated. And if you know about the relationship of the color wheel, basically colors that are opposite from each other are complements. And when you mix two complements together, it forms a desaturated color. So if you want to desaturate sort of an orange, you want to add blue. if you want to desaturate reds and pinks, you want to add green. So that's why one of the reasons why I choose blues and greens for my base color, because I know that by placing oranges and yellows on top of it, it will make them less saturated and look a bit more realistic. Complementary colors are also visually appealing when they're close to each other, so sometimes I let the underlayers show through so that the blue or green adds visual interest to the portrait. This method of painting is not completely unique to my process, and I definitely didn't invent it. Other artists use it currently, and it's been around for a while. The basic idea comes from the Verdaccio oil painting technique. So while green and blue are my go-to colors, I also like to experiment and try other underpainting colors to see what effect it has on the final result. So experiment and try it out for yourself and see what you may like. So that does it for the second portrait. Now on to the third. So back to Q&A questions. Little Miss Bria asks, how old were you when you discovered your love for art? As early as I can remember, ever since I was a kid. Throughout the years, I always drew on and off, sort of in the background, but I just recently started taking it more seriously around 3 years ago. Art by April asks, what is your biggest hurdle as an artist today? I would say my biggest hurdles are confidence, 1, and 2, trying to find my artistic voice. Like, what is it that I'm actually trying to say with my art? I haven't quite found it yet. Throughout this time, I've been mostly focusing on improving my skills and technique. But I feel like artists that have a combination of having something to say as well as having the skills to execute puts them on a whole new level as an artist, and that's where I want to get to one day. What is your favorite and most hated facial feature to draw/paint, and why? So my least favorite feature to paint, I would say ears for sure. I like to draw them, but when painting them, I always save them for last because I like to use bigger brushes for as long as possible. But with the ears, it's harder to get the details with a big brush. My favorite thing to paint is just the skin color in general. I really like varying up the color temperatures and adding different colors to see what effect it has on how the portrait looks. Zani Arts also asks, what makes you love this kind of dynamic and blocky style? And how have you come to do it? It's amazing. Well, thank you. And I like the blocky style because it helps to show form better. Like, I like to think of the portraits I'm painting in terms of like the 3D volumes that they are. I don't think of it as just exactly copying a photo how I see it. I try to understand it in terms of a 3D object. So using a blocky style definitely helps out with that. And that's one of the main reasons that I like to use flat brushes for most of the painting, because with flat brushes you have to make deliberate strokes, and they form sort of angular fields of color, if that makes sense. So that's it for the Q&As. I'll try to do another one at some point. get some more questions that I may not have gotten to today. But thank you if you made it this far. Thanks for watching. Thanks for submitting questions if you did. And just thank you in general just for being here. Gotta be a little more consistent here on YouTube, but still trying to figure out what I want this channel to be and what kind of content I want to post. In general, if you guys just like the time lapses or like this voiceover format better, just let me know in the comments. And yeah, thank you. Thanks for stopping by.